The Sound of Music, 1965, is more than just a film. It's a cherished piece of cinematic history that continues to touch hearts around the world. With its unforgettable songs, breathtaking scenery, and a cast full of charm and talent, it became an instant classic. But behind the magic of the movie lies a more somber reality. Many of the beloved actors who brought the Von Trapp family and their world to life have sadly passed away, some under tragic and heartbreaking circumstances. In this video, we take a heartfelt look back at the stars of The Sound of Music, celebrating their lives, remembering their performances, and revealing the touching and often tragic truths behind their final days. Christopher Plummer was born on December 13, 1929, and portrayed Captain Georg von Trapp in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 36. His character, a rigid, grieving naval officer, underwent a profound transformation through love and music, captivating audiences with his emotional thaw. But Plummer despised the role, branding the beloved musical The Sound of Mucus and calling the captain a cardboard figure. This contempt wasn't just artistic snobbery, it masked deeper frustrations about being pigeonholed and misunderstood. Born into Canadian aristocracy, but raised by a domineering mother after his parents' divorce, he was denied emotional warmth from an early age, which perhaps explains his lifelong aversion to sentimentality. A gifted classical actor, Plummer often self-sabotaged his own career with arrogance and alcohol. In the 1970s, he was blacklisted from several productions for his drunken behavior and reportedly slapped a director during rehearsals for Othello. Though never caught in tabloid-level scandal, insiders whispered about his explosive temper and ruthless perfectionism, traits that alienated co-stars and cost him major roles. His first marriage collapsed in bitterness, and his daughter Amanda Plummer, herself a successful actress, described their relationship as distant and complicated. He remarried but was often absent, favoring long theatrical tours over family life. In his later years, Plummer achieved a stunning comeback, becoming the oldest actor to win an Oscar at 82. But even then, he was vocal about his loathing of Hollywood's plastic politeness and dismissed most modern directors as children with cameras. Christopher Plummer died on February 5, 2021, at the age of 91, from complications after a fall in Weston, Connecticut. His estate was valued at approximately $20 million, including real estate, royalties, and investment assets. Despite his disdain for his most famous role, it remains the one that immortalized him, a bitter irony he seemed to reluctantly accept as he aged. Eleanor Parker was born on June 26, 1922, and played Baroness Elsa Schrader in The Sound of Music in 1965 at age 43. Her portrayal of the elegant socialite poised to marry Captain Von Trapp was defined by subtle manipulation masked in charm. She was not a villain, but a strategic woman aware of her slipping influence. That tension mirrored Parker's real life more than most realized. Born in small-town Ohio to strict disciplinarian parents, Eleanor endured emotional neglect and suffered a nervous breakdown in her teens, something she kept hidden for decades. She arrived in Hollywood with fire, but also fear, and quickly gained a reputation for being both brilliant and volatile. While never embroiled in overt scandal, she was known for her stormy marriages, 4 in total. One husband accused her of emotional cruelty and manipulation during their divorce, while another, a producer, allegedly banned her from auditioning for certain films after a bitter separation. Professionally, Parker's most humiliating fall came in the early 1960s when she was abruptly replaced in a high-profile TV series pilot, allegedly due to creative differences. Though many insiders pointed to her refusal to work with male producers she considered sexist. She was also rumored to have suffered from agoraphobia in later years, rarely leaving her Palm Springs home. Her children described her as complicated, and one son was reportedly estranged from her during the 1980s. Though never arrested or publicly disgraced, her career quietly faded. And by the 1970s, she was mostly forgotten by the industry that once nominated her for 3 Oscars. She died on December 9, 2013, in Palm Springs, California, from complications of pneumonia, aged 91. Her estate was modest, estimated under $1 million, consisting mostly of personal property and limited royalties. Despite her once dazzling Hollywood presence, Parker passed in relative obscurity, a star dimmed long before her final curtain. Charmian Carr was born on December 27, 1942, and played Liesl von Trapp in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 22. Her portrayal of the eldest von Trapp daughter, idealistic, dreamy, and caught in the delicate bloom of adolescence, cemented her status as a Hollywood ingenue. But behind the bright smile and twirling choreography of 16 going on 17, Carr's reality was far more complicated. Raised in a fractured household with a pushy stage mother and a largely absent father, Charmian spent her early years shuffled between relatives and constantly told she was not enough to make it. Though she beat out more famous names for the role of Liesl, she faced immense pressure to maintain a clean image while privately struggling with body image issues and insecurity. Hollywood's cruelty toward young women haunted her. She later confessed to being told she was too fat by studio executives despite her willowy frame. After the film, she was offered contracts but balked at the industry's demand for sexualized roles. One disastrous audition for a romantic lead in 1967 ended in her storming off set after a producer allegedly asked her to perform topless. A scandal she never publicly named, but privately called "the moment I realized Hollywood was never safe for girls like me." Her marriage to dentist Jay Brent unraveled in a slow implosion of emotional neglect, ending in a bitter divorce in 1991 that left her drained and financially strained. Her two daughters later described her as a mother torn between nostalgia and sadness, often drifting into depression. In her later years, Carr was diagnosed with dementia, which eroded her memory but, ironically, sharpened her longing for the past. She died on September 17, 2016, in Woodland Hills, California, at the age of 73. Her estate included a modest home, limited royalties from the film, and her interior design business, valued at under $1 million. Despite the fame, her life was marked by a quiet ache, the kind that never made headlines but lingered in every forgotten lyric of her most famous song. Anna Lee, born January 2, 1913, portrayed Sister Margareta in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 52. Her character was the gentle, subversive heart of the convent, one of the few to encourage Maria to follow her heart, even if it meant defying the abbey's expectations. With a twinkle in her eye and quiet defiance in her tone, Sister Margareta became a subtle audience favorite. But the woman behind the wimple had lived through storms far more harrowing than anything the film suggested. Born into privilege in Kent, Lee's early years were hollow with emotional neglect. Her parents were more interested in appearances than affection. Sent to finishing school, she was taught to smile through pain, even when her early dreams were mocked as silly girl fantasies. Though she rose quickly in the 1930s British film scene, earning the moniker the Queen of the Quota Quickies, her early fame was built on grueling hours and uncredited work, often under abusive directors. Her marriages brought little solace. Her second husband, George Stafford, was plagued with alcoholism and violent outbursts. Their home life was toxic, and she fled more than once. In 1981, a car accident left her paralyzed from the waist down. While publicly stoic, privately she battled suicidal thoughts and felt betrayed by an industry that quickly forgot her. She fought her way back onto screens, demanding dignity in a wheelchair, a move many directors resisted. Rumors swirled of on-set clashes in General Hospital, where some found her impossible to direct, though others blamed producers for exploiting her disability. Financially, Lee struggled. Decades in the business yielded less than $1 million in assets, most of which went to medical bills and a modest home in Beverly Hills. She died on May 14, 2004 at 91 from pneumonia. Her legacy, though glossed with polite tributes, conceals the truth of a woman who endured personal wreckage, industry betrayal, and bodily ruin, yet kept performing until the end, alone, defiant, and vastly underpaid. Heather Menses, Uric, born December 3, 1949, appeared as Louisa von Trapp in The Sound of Music in 1965 at just 15 years old. On screen, she was spirited and daring, a firecracker of a girl always up to mischief. Off-screen, her life took turns that clashed violently with the innocence the role had etched into the public memory. Born in Canada and orphaned by age 14, Menses was raised by distant relatives and passed through a series of Catholic boarding schools where, according to later interviews, she experienced repeated emotional abuse and was forced into rigid conformity. Her escape into acting was not born from passion, but desperation. Hollywood provided a brief sanctuary, but as the sweetness of Louisa faded, she fought to shed her child star image. Her infamous 1973 Playboy spread, fully nude, shocked fans and alienated former colleagues from the film. She confessed to using alcohol and pills in her 20s to cope with the pressure and rejection, and once admitted to blacking out for days at a time. Though her marriage to Robert Urich brought temporary stability, insiders claimed it was fraught with jealousy, and his battle with cancer only intensified her descent into anxiety. After his death in 2002, she reportedly battled depression and financial strain, relying on dwindling royalties and occasional fan conventions to make ends meet. Though she founded the Robert Urich Foundation for Cancer Research, it was marred by rumors of mismanaged funds and internal disputes with her children. Heather died of brain cancer on December 24, 2017, in Frankfurt, Ontario, at age 68. Her estate, made up of a modest property and residual checks, was worth less than $1 million. Her legacy is layered, part child icon, part adult survivor, trapped between the fantasy she helped create and the brutal truths she never stopped running from. Gilchrist Stewart, born January 19, 1919, in London, England, portrayed Franz, the Von Trapp household's discreet but ominously conflicted butler in The Sound of Music, 1965, at the age of 46. With subtle gestures and measured silences, Franz conveyed a chilling complicity, hinting at his Nazi sympathies without a single overt act of betrayal. His performance added an understated menace to the family's escape plot. But behind the name Gilchrist Stewart was Derek Grist, a man who spent much of his life hiding, not just behind stage names, but behind carefully managed privacy. Born into a rigid, lower-middle-class British household, Derek endured a childhood defined by emotional coldness and crushing expectations. He trained as a classical actor, but despite early promise, he quickly found himself relegated to the shadows of Hollywood, always a supporting face, never a star. There were whispers that Stewart's sexuality, never publicly addressed, cost him key roles in a deeply homophobic mid-century industry. His marriage to Sasha Berger, though legally binding, was suspected by colleagues to be one of convenience, a shield against scrutiny. Known for his formality and strict professional boundaries, Stewart was often described as unreachable by fellow actors. He never caused public scandal, but some who worked with him found his emotional distance and obsessive punctuality unnerving, even robotic. His most devastating career blow came in 1961 when he was cut from a major studio film just days before filming, allegedly replaced by a younger, more marketable actor. After that, roles dwindled, and Stewart spent his final years doing voiceovers and teaching elocution to starlets half his age. Diagnosed with cancer in the mid-1970s, he declined rapidly but refused to discuss his illness with friends or family. He died on June 8, 1977, in Hollywood, California, at age 58. At the time of his death, his estate was modest, valued under $300,000, including a small condo, savings, and residuals. His quiet legacy remains buried behind layers of stagecraft, secrecy, and sorrow. Porsche Nelson, born May 27, 1920, played Sister Bertha in The Sound of Music in 1965 when she was 45 years old. Her stern, disapproving portrayal of the nun provided a perfect counterbalance to Maria's spontaneity and charm. And while audiences may have disliked Bertha's harshness, they couldn't ignore her presence. Off-screen, however, Nelson lived a life of concealed pain, unspoken desire, and artistic loneliness. Raised in a strict Mormon household in Utah, she was shamed early on for her attraction to music, literature, and later, women. Forced to hide her identity, she relocated to New York, where she built a quiet but emotionally intense career in cabaret and songwriting. Her song lyrics were filled with themes of longing, spiritual searching, and regret, reflections of her own life, which included a secret long-term relationship with a married woman in the 1950s, a scandal she kept buried even in her journals. Though lauded for her depth, Nelson was blacklisted from several Broadway projects for being difficult, and, some whispered, for her sexuality. She drank heavily during the 70s, disappearing from the stage for years amid a breakdown never made public. When she returned, her work had darkened. Friends described her as haunted but brilliant. Despite writing the now famous poem, "There's a Hole in My Sidewalk," her commercial success was limited. She never married, had no children, and spent her final years living alone in a cramped New York apartment filled with dusty notebooks and broken records. She died on March 6, 2001, at the age of 80. The cause was never publicly disclosed. Her net worth was under $500,000, her estate comprising mostly personal writings, a piano, and modest royalties. Porsche Nelson's life was a quiet storm of heartbreak, censorship, and creativity. A legacy more whispered than celebrated, and far more complex than the brief on-screen nun she once portrayed. Marne Nixon, born February 22, 1930, took on the role of Sister Sophia in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 35. Her serene presence and warm soprano in How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria belied a stormy, often bitter relationship with the Hollywood system. Known off-screen as the ghost voice of Hollywood, Nixon dubbed the singing parts for some of cinema's most iconic actresses: Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady, Natalie Wood in West Side Story, and Deborah Kerr in The King and I. But those golden notes earned her neither public credit nor proper royalties for years. Studio executives silenced her with gag orders and threatened to blacklist her if she revealed her involvement. The injustice haunted her for decades, and she privately referred to that era as a prison in which I sang for everyone but myself. Raised in a strict, performance-obsessed household in California, Nixon was pushed into musical training as a child and suffered from debilitating anxiety and perfectionism. Her first marriage to film composer Ernest Gold was marred by professional jealousy and emotional distance. Though she had 3 children, including singer-songwriter Andrew Gold, family life was turbulent. Her second husband died young, and her third marriage ended in emotional collapse. She developed breast cancer in the early 2000s and continued to perform even during chemotherapy. One of her greatest personal betrayals occurred in the 1970s, when she discovered that a major label had been selling her recordings under another artist's name. She fought back through legal channels and slowly reclaimed her narrative, teaching, performing, and speaking out about Hollywood's exploitation. Nixon died on July 24, 2016, in New York City, age 86. At the time of her death, her net worth was estimated around $1 million, accumulated through late-life tours teaching posts, and finally receiving recognition for the voice that defined a generation, one that the industry long tried to erase. Ben Wright, born on May 5, 1915, played Herr Zeller in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 50, a role that leveraged his steely demeanor to personify the insidious rise of Nazism. Though Zeller had limited screen time, Wright's portrayal chilled audiences, his cold glares and clipped German accent providing a dark counterbalance to the film's musical warmth. In real life, Wright was a chameleon of voices, but behind that polished versatility was a man whose life was far more fragmented than public records suggest. Born into a working-class household and raised by an alcoholic father who disappeared when he was 10, Wright's early years were marred by poverty and humiliation. He was mocked for his effeminate voice and slight frame, leading to deep insecurities he never quite shed. Although he found his footing in radio, Hollywood proved less forgiving. Wright was quietly blacklisted in the early 50s due to vague accusations of communist sympathies, a stain that limited his film career for years. His most painful professional blow came when Disney cut his voice role from Sleeping Beauty without credit or compensation, leading to a bitter legal dispute that never reached court. Known privately for obsessive perfectionism, Wright was notorious among voice directors for refusing direction, earning him a reputation as both brilliant and unmanageable. His personal life was equally opaque. Twice divorced, he distanced himself from both his children, one of whom later publicly accused him of emotional abandonment. Friends recall Wright descending into depression in the late 80s, haunted by regret and failing health. He died of heart failure on July 2, 1989, in Burbank at age 74. His estate included a modest home in Toluca Lake, vintage radio memorabilia, and sparse financial assets, with his net worth estimated under $500,000. Though he remained largely forgotten at death, Wright's sharp-edged roles left behind a quiet legacy of complexity and unspoken pain. Richard Heayen was born on March 10, 1905, and portrayed Max Detweiler in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 60. Max, with his flamboyant charm and opportunistic flair, acted as both comic relief and a symbol of survivalist pragmatism, a man who navigated the Nazi occupation with wit rather than conviction. Audiences adored his theatrical flamboyance and subtle moral compass, especially in contrast to the film's more idealistic characters. But behind that performance lay a man cloaked in eccentricity, secrecy, and quiet emotional turmoil. Born George Richard Heayen in working-class Camberwell, London, he reinvented himself from an early age, crafting an exaggerated persona that few ever penetrated. His childhood was marred by poverty and a brutally strict father who disapproved of his artistic interests, forcing him to hide his love of performance under layers of affectation. In Hollywood, Heayen became known for his oddball delivery and nasal voice, which masked a deep anxiety about being forgotten or misunderstood. Though he never courted scandal publicly, industry insiders spoke in hushed tones about his notorious perfectionism and paranoia. Directors found him difficult. He would reportedly halt production over minor line changes and insist on reviewing multiple takes in private. His greatest career disappointment came in the 1950s, when he was passed over for a major role in My Fair Lady, a rejection that sent him into seclusion for over a year. He never married, and while he was briefly engaged to Maria Riva, daughter of Marlene Dietrich, the engagement ended abruptly amid speculation of infidelity and control issues. Friends suggested he harbored lifelong guilt about an estranged sibling he refused to speak of, and he battled depression throughout his later years. He turned obsessively to gardening, once spending over $20,000 importing rare orchids, a hobby he confessed became an escape from people. Richard Heayen died of a heart attack on April 25, 1985, in Pacific Palisades, California, at age 80. He left behind a modest estate, estimated under $500,000, comprised largely of his garden property and personal artifacts. Norma Varden, born January 20, 1898, took on the role of Frau Schmidt in The Sound of Music in 1965 at age 67, portraying the Von Trapp family's efficient, stoic housekeeper. But beneath the character's prim exterior and Varden's own real-life reputation for refinement lay a web of contradictions. Born to a strict Anglican family, Varden was forced into the discipline of classical piano, performing for aristocrats as a child while privately harboring stage fright, so severe she once fainted mid-concerto. Abandoning music for the theater in her 30s, she reinvented herself through sheer will, despite whispers in the London stage circuit that she slept her way through the West End, a claim she never publicly addressed. Her Hollywood years were marked by whispered feuds, especially with Marilyn Monroe, who reportedly called her a stuck-up fossil during Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Though Varden appeared genteel, she was said to be ruthlessly critical behind closed doors, dismissing younger actresses as cheap imitations. Her greatest professional humiliation came in 1961 when she was unceremoniously recast from a major MGM film after allegedly insulting the producer's wife during a private dinner. Varden never married and was rumored to have had a decades-long secret romance with a fellow actress, who disappeared from public life under mysterious circumstances. Later in life, she struggled with loneliness and frequent hospitalizations due to chronic heart issues, and her final years were spent in a modest retirement home in Santa Barbara. She died one day before her 91st birthday on January 19, 1989, from heart failure. Her estate, modest and largely consisting of personal antiques, was valued under $500,000. While rarely in the spotlight, Varden's hidden sharpness and unsung resilience etched her into Hollywood's history as a woman who played by no one's rules but her own. Doris Lloyd was born on July 3, 1896, and portrayed the icy Baroness Eberfeld in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 69. Though her role was minor, an aristocratic party guest with few lines, Lloyd's refined presence commanded the screen, embodying the fading class of Austrian nobility with effortless elegance. But her real life was far more complex than her prim personas. Born in working-class Walton, Liverpool, Doris grew up under the oppressive rule of a disciplinarian father and a mother who battled chronic illness. She fled to America in the 1920s, allegedly after a scandal involving a broken engagement and a married theater producer, rumors that haunted her for years. Once in Hollywood, she reshaped herself as a reliable supporting actress, appearing in over 150 films. However, behind her composed demeanor, she was known to be fiercely competitive and often clashed with younger actresses on set. One producer recalled how she once threatened to walk off a film if her dressing room wasn't moved farther from an overly chatty ingenue. Her biggest professional humiliation came in 1954, when Walt Disney replaced her last minute in a leading voice role, without explanation. She kept working, often in maid or dowager roles, but never achieved the lead roles she longed for. She never married and was rumored to have carried on a series of discreet relationships with married directors, none of which lasted. Her final years were lonely. After suffering a mild stroke in 1966, she withdrew from public life and reportedly refused visitors, living with only a nurse and 2 dogs in Santa Barbara. On May 21, 1968, Doris Lloyd died of a heart ailment at age 71. Her estate was valued at under $300,000. A reflection of a career rooted in background performances and supporting roles. While she left no heirs, her journals, unpublished but preserved, hinted at a life filled with unspoken ambition, artistic betrayal, and a stubborn refusal to disappear quietly. Gertrude Aster was born on November 9, 1887, and appeared in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 78 as an uncredited party guest, a final flicker in a screen career that once burned bright in the silent era. Towering at 5'11", she was a striking presence on and off camera, but her physicality often confined her to roles as the other woman, the comic relief, or the brazen socialite. Aster's early life was a carnival of instability. Born in Ohio to a traveling photographer and a seamstress, she learned to play the trombone and saxophone on a Mississippi riverboat before drifting into acting. Her size and brassy personality initially opened doors, but by the 1930s, she was already struggling with Hollywood's disdain for aging women. She kept working into her 70s, clinging to background roles while navigating the humiliation of being forgotten. Privately, she battled gambling addiction, a vice she disguised as poker nights with the girls, that reportedly left her nearly bankrupt in the late 1940s. Though she never married, she maintained a string of tempestuous relationships with actors and producers, some of whom she later referred to in interviews with barely concealed bitterness. In 1958, she suffered a breakdown after being omitted from a studio tribute to silent film stars, an exclusion she took as a personal betrayal. Despite her struggles, she maintained a veneer of elegance. Known in her later years for sweeping into studio lots, wearing vintage furs and elbow-length gloves, even for roles without lines. She was honored in 1975 with a tribute at Universal Studios, though by then she was living in near anonymity. Gertrude Aster died of a stroke on her 90th birthday, November 9, 1977, in Woodland Hills. Her estate was modest, under $500,000, including costume jewelry, old scripts, and her prized saxophone. While forgotten by the mainstream, she remains a symbol of Hollywood's cruel ephemerality, a woman who gave the industry her youth and style, and in return was granted silence. Peggy Wood was born on February 9, 1892, and played the serene and commanding Mother Abbess in The Sound of Music in 1965 at the age of 73. As the spiritual center of the convent, Mother Abbess offered guidance with unwavering calm, delivering one of the film's most iconic lines through the soaring anthem, "Climb Every Mountain." Although Wood, too frail to sing it herself, was dubbed by Marjorie Mackay. Her performance was a final, stately bow from a woman who had ruled the early 20th century stage, yet never truly cracked the code of Hollywood success. Wood's childhood in Brooklyn was colored by quiet sorrow. Her father, a strict and emotionally detached businessman, expected obedience and rejected Peggy's theatrical ambitions outright. Her mother's early death from illness left her reeling and emotionally withdrawn, something that shaped her refined, distant persona for the rest of her life. Behind the cultured poise, Peggy harbored years of frustration with an industry that sidelined aging women, particularly those who lacked the glamorous looks demanded by 1930s studios. Though she was a Broadway star and a fixture in early television, she was plagued by insecurity and often clashed with directors, known to rewrite dialogue to suit her own style, which earned her the label difficult in backstage whispers. Her greatest heartbreak came not from her work, but her personal life. She was twice widowed, first to poet John V. Butler, then to actor William H. Walling, and never fully recovered from the deaths. Her only child, a son, reportedly distanced himself in her later years, frustrated by what he called her obsessive need for control. Friends described her as brilliant but aloof, fiercely private and prone to isolation. Toward the end of her life, she suffered several strokes, the last of which ended her life on March 18, 1978, in Stamford, Connecticut, at the age of 86. Her estate, accumulated from decades of theater, early TV, and modest film work, was estimated under $500,000. Thank you for watching as we reflected on the lives and legacies of the actors from The Sound of Music who are no longer with us. Their humor, charm, and unforgettable performances brought joy to millions and helped shape the show into a classic. While their journeys ended far too soon, their impact lives on through every scene, every laugh, and every memory they've left behind. As we honor their lives, we're reminded of how deeply television can touch our hearts. Join us next time as we look back at more stars who left us too soon, but whose stories continue to shine.